let's cut this bow tie. It's a very interesting bow tie on the, we're looking at the bottom side of this tabletop. I'm just going to strike these X-Acto lines a little bit darker. Hopefully you can see these. This bow tie hangs off a bit, kind of like this one next to it that you might be able to see. And I'm doing these out of walnut because I actually don't want these to be super visible like I would normally do in a contrasting lighter wood. The grain is already going the opposite direction of this grain, so I think it'll be as visible as it really needs to be already. I'm going to start by striking a line right inside those cut lines. I'm going to start on the end grain first. And the reason I'm striking this line slightly inside is because I like to lever, when I'm hogging out all this material, I like to lever my chisel against the edge of this knife line. And if I'm doing that on my perfect fit, then I'm gonna kind of bend that wood out a little bit and it's gonna look really rounded out on that edge and it's not gonna fit super nicely. So if I cut just slightly inside, I'm now rounding out wood that I'm just gonna waste out anyway, or hog out later anyway. Let me start with the big chisel. I am also starting each cut, like this cut I'm about to do right now, on the edge grain. And the reason for doing that is to help prevent tear out. The wood is running along this way. The grain you can see is running along this way. And if I cut that edge first, then I'm not going to tear out pieces on the long grain side. So I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. Go with my small chisel up here. Don't have to hit this one as hard because I'm going along the grain pattern. Now, let me show you kind of what I'm talking about. If I chisel this piece up right here against the grain, what's going to happen is this grain's going to fold up just like that. You can see how I have all this grain, this wood that's still attached, and I can cut that off, but I don't have a clean line. Now, because I chopped this hard against that long grain, obviously when I chisel this out, well, I've got a clean line right where I chopped, so I've got nothing to worry about there. That's why when chiseling, you want to, or paring down, like anything like this, or mortising, whatever it may be, start with that long grain to prevent all that tear out. Coming in with this 1/8 inch paring chisel. This was a gift from Alexis's sister, actually, I think, or maybe her mom on Christmas a couple years ago. It's slightly different than my other chisels. It's thicker, kind of like a mortising chisel, which is really, in my opinion, necessary on an 1/8 inch chisel because it's so easy to bend this. But it also looks a little different than my other chisels. Chop out a little more. When I'm doing this, I'm also skewing my chisel towards the part that I'm wasting out. And the reason for that is I'm kind of tapering on the inside, but at the very end, when we're ready to fit the bow tie in there, I will actually do the opposite. I'll taper it a little bit outside. And again, it's just about trying to preserve the right side of the cut, or the correct side of the cut, let me put it that way. Will this chisel fit in there? Nope. Back to that 1/8 inch. Just paring this down a little bit. The bottom of this bow tie doesn't need to be perfectly aesthetically pleasing. It needs to be relatively flat, well enough for the adhesive glued it here and create a good joint with, or create a good bond with the bow tie itself. But when it gets to that point, I'm not going to really clean it up a ton because nobody's ever going to see it. It's very calming working on these little bow ties, as I'm sure it is hopefully for you guys watching as well. This stuff takes a while. I think normally for this one, for bow ties this size, maybe half an hour a bow tie. For a normal size bow tie that I do, I normally plan on an hour per bow tie, and then a little bit of time for cleanup, just to give you an idea of the effort and time that it takes to go into each one of these. Now, unlike most of the bow ties that I do, which are primarily just aesthetic, these actually are functional because I have this big crack running across here that I've very lightly filled with a bit of epoxy. And then clamped together to try and draw it all together. These actually are functional bow ties that I'm doing for once. So, unlike my aesthetic ones, which I do pretty shallow in depth, I'm going to go a little deeper on this to actually try and give this some functional mechanical strength here. See how we're looking. Yeah, this is a very interesting bow tie because a large part of it is hanging off, and I'll cut that off later. I think we need to go deeper. Deeper! If we go too deep though, we'll start poking out the top. I definitely prefer not to have this showing on the top side of this tabletop. So I think this will be the last bit of pairing we're going to do on this bow tie. I'd say we're, 5/16 of an inch. I just flipped my chisel over to use maybe more of a mortising effect with this chisel, because of the depth that I'm working at right now. Now back here I could definitely use the flat side of my chisel. Flipped it over, back to the mortising side. And you can see I'm kind of levering a little bit, just I can feel the left side of my chisel touching the wall here, and that's why I tapered everything in a bit, was to prevent that rounding out of the face that will be visible. I think that's about it. Just clean some of this out. My X-Acto knife. See how that looks? Looks pretty decent. Let's come back in and chop out that taper now the opposite way. I'm going to make this a fat-bottomed mortise for this bow tie, because in this household we prefer all things fat-bottomed. Very satisfying chopping of the membrane here. Clean out some of this stuff so we aren't hanging up on anything. All right, let's see if this one and done. Oh yeah, that's quite nice. Wow, I don't think we need to adjust that at all. Let's glue this up. I'm using Tight Bond 2. Not that that fucking matters at all. But we like tight bonds. I took a class on adhesives actually once. Woodworking adhesives. Like this, a PVA glue. Anyway, super interesting to me, but real fucking boring probably. I have a little bit of walnut sawdust here from when I was cutting these bow ties on the bandsaw. This part right here. I'm just gonna rub that into this joint just to give this a, any of those tiny little cracks we might have or little gaps, just to make this really aesthetically pleasing. And then a patient person would wait for this adhesive to dry before cutting that. But I've never been really known for my patience, so I have my flush cut trim saw here. This one's a bit beat up because I use it for things that are like this where the glue is still drying. So it's a bit rougher of a saw. I have another one that I use when I'm patient and I let the adhesive dry. We're just trying to get a somewhat close cut here. And then I'm going to cut the face of this off, or the tail of this off really, I guess. Good looking joint there, I think. This one really doesn't serve a ton of purpose. But what I'll then do is I'll take my small block paint plane, set it a very, very low chip removal, and I'll just plane that smooth. I'm going to show you that on one of these other ones that's already dry, or mostly dry. So I can see it starting to cut a little bit into this corner, so we're pretty close to flush here. Wow, that's actually dead on. All right, I don't want to mess with perfection. Now, the harder cut is we're going to try and plane this edge down. I'm going to use the spoke shave for that because that curved surface. I'm going to also cut this way because this tabletop grain is running this way. If I cut this way, I'll be pushing up against that grain, and I'll want to, it'll tear out. It'll fold it back on itself. So it's really hard to cut this end grain of this bow tie. I mean, I've got just grains going in two different ways, but that looks to have done it with a nice sharp spoke shave. You too can achieve these results. Anyway, I'll do the other one off camera. So, peace, y'all.